Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Last spring, Mayor Adams said he was going to turn New York into a city of yes. Yes in my backyard, yes on my block, yes in my neighborhood, with a plan to use the city's zoning tools to support small businesses, create affordable housing, and promote sustainability. Of course, trying to roll it out is a whole other matter. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the possibilities with the Bronx Councilman, who's the chair of the Land Use Committee, and also a former Bronx district manager, who is now in the process of taking a new look at empty office space. So let's get right to it. Please join me in welcoming the council member from the 17th Council District in the South Bronx, the Honorable Rafael Salmanca Jr. Nice to have you with us, council member.
Gary, thank you for having me.
And as I mentioned before, he's a former district manager in the Bronx, now the executive director of the 5 Borough Housing Movement, John Sanchez. John, nice to see you again.
Likewise. Thanks, Gary.
Council member, let's just start with you. Let's talk about the mayor's plan. On top of the mayor saying he was going to be a city of yes, Governor Hochul wants to build 800,000 new homes statewide. Of course, many of them would be in New York City. Since you see all the rezoning efforts and how New York City will use its land, how realistic are these goals, these highfalutin goals, and what has to happen to make them actually come true?
Well, you know, Gary, we are in the city of New York. We're in a housing crisis. You know, last night, close to 70,000 individuals slept in a homeless bed. And so we need to figure out, as elected leaders, out of the box thinking as to how can we create more housing stock throughout the entire city of New York, all 5 boroughs. And an idea has come up, an out of the box thinking idea as to how do we convert commercial space that it's vacant at the moment and converting it into residential. And you know, as you've seen, the pandemic hit us hard, and what we did was we created new ways as to how we're going to deal with this pandemic and work. And one of the ideas was the hybrid model, where we have many individuals who are working, but they're working from home. And as a result, we have vacant commercial space throughout the city of New York.
I think your co-contributor here would certainly agree with that. How much of that space is here in the Bronx? Is there a significant number that would have impact?
Well, what we're seeing, if we were to move forward with this plan, and within the next 10 years, we're talking about creating close to 20,000 new homes, which will create homes for about 40,000 New Yorkers. But the concept here really is focusing on these areas, such as Manhattan and certain areas of the Bronx, as to how do we convert them. And so, you know, and so next week, Tuesday, my committee will host a hearing where city planning will be there because they will be responsible for coming up with this plan as to how to move forward. There would be many ideas floated, but most importantly, the elephant in the room is how is this going to be funded?
You led perfectly into the conversation with John Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez, just talk about the movement, why you think what the councilman was suggesting is a good thing and what the need is.
Well, the councilman is exactly right. We have a housing crisis, and we have certain neighborhoods in the city that aren't building enough housing compared to other parts of the Bronx that are building tons of housing. So the 5 Borough Housing Movement really wants to change the state law that prohibits office conversions from happening in the first place, lifting the outdated FAR cap that prevents more affordable housing from being built, and make sure that there's some affordability as part of these office conversions, because we have to look at every tool in the toolbox.
You told me on the phone, and you know that I reacted to it. I don't know, I'm assuming the council member is aware as well, that the laws were created in 1961 and they haven't been updated. And so, correct me if I say this wrong, that any thing that was constructed since 1961, which you can do the math on how long ago that is, anything that was constructed since then, if it's now vacant, can't be physically converted. Is this true?
Yeah, so
This is true.
The state law is complex. If you're built before 1961, you can convert. If you're built between 1961 and 1977, you can only convert if you're in Lower Manhattan, south of Murray Street. If you're post 1977, you can't convert at all.
So this is a state thing?
This is a state law.
Then we're going to ask the councilman to get it done, but he can't. He can't get it done. What can the city do? Can the city weigh in on this whole process?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are different ways. First, we're working with the city, and we're working with the state legislature as to how can we change these laws. Right. Second, it is upon city planning to come up with a plan in which we can submit to the state to see how we can reverse these laws, and that is exactly what's occurring here.
You're saying that's the first step, and you agree with that?
Well, that's one of many steps.
One of many steps.
And then we also have to look at land or a property that was built prior to 1961, in which there may be a possibility in converting. And those are the conversations. Those are the conversations that we will have at the hearing next week, Tuesday, with city planning.
The question that the council member asked just a moment ago was about funding. Are these the developers, private companies that are going to say, okay, now we take these properties and we give them to you? Is this a community land trust issue? I mean, how is the ownership of the properties taken care of? And then, of course, who does the work? And he asked the bottom line, who pays for it?
Yeah, well, the state, right now, the governor has a proposal that there would be a tax abatement for providing some affordability. So they would have affordable units as a part of the program. We're not advocating for the state to subsidize construction on all market rate housing.
You're looking at another 421A plan if you do that.
Very different, because 421A is for brand new construction. This is specifically for office conversions,
right.
So much smaller in scale than any other program that you're mentioning.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying is the tax abatements is a big thing, is
Yes,
a way to do this.
Because we're talking about real estate south of 96th Street. This is valuable real estate, and the conversions that are happening now are all market rate. We want to see a change in that.
Council member, when you look at because you see all the projects that come in, the council members come to you and say, hey, what do we do about this? How much of it is dealing with current infrastructure and renovating current infrastructure, or is it more often new land, a community garden that somebody, or somebody's just simply transferring a property? What do you see as chair of the land use chair?
Well, the applications that come forward through our committee, mostly when we're talking about rezoning land, we're talking about building new construction. And depending on depending what part of the city. Now there's this law that's called mandatory inclusionary housing (MIH) that will require, if you're taking a piece of land and you're converting it into residential and you're not building 100% affordable housing, a percentage of those units must remain affordable. So that's one application. You also have another application where you may have a building which is rent stabilized, and the tax credits are going to expire. And so normally the developer or the property owner will apply for what's called an Article 11 so that they can keep the rent stabilized, but there's capital dollars injected into that building so that they can fix the elevators, fix the roofs, fix the stairs, whatever capital needs.
What do you see more of?
I see a combination of both.
I
see a combination of both.
And do you have something you'd recommend in this case and say, or you wait and see what everybody brings to the table before you?
No, Gary,
I know he's listening with very curiously. What is the councilman going to say?
The reality is that we are in the
We're
house.
negotiating the whole deal here, by the way. So we get it done. The city can just listen to what we say.
The reality is that we are in a housing crunch, Yes. And for example, in the 7 years that I've been in office, I've built over 7,000 units of 100% affordable housing. My colleagues have also built thousands of units of affordable housing. Low-income communities cannot build affordable housing for all New Yorkers. There has to be fair share. Everyone throughout the city of New York must do their fair share. This is an opportunity where we can take communities or areas in which their real estate is extremely high, they're vacant, therefore the property owners is not generating any revenue, and they have an opportunity where they can take that vacant land from commercial, convert it to residential, but we're not just advocating for market rate. There has to be a percentage of those units that must be affordable.
And when you say a percentage, first you said 100%, but then all of a sudden we hear 20% or 15%, and then the next thing you hear is gentrification.
No. There should be, if we're talking about converting commercial to residential,
Right.
and that property is owned by a developer,
Right.
and they're asking us to rezone it, we need to come up with a formula where a percentage of those commercial.
But you don't know which percentage yet. is what I'm getting.
That's why we're going to have a hearing on Tuesday, so that we can come up with what is feasible. Now, let me be clear here. This is something that city planning is responsible for. So therefore, they've come up with a plan which they will present to us on Tuesday.
Let's just talk about rezoning, and then we're going to ask you about what might need to be rezoned in some of the cases. And one of the things that they work on, folks, is Lower Manhattan, below 96th Street. So we can still talk about that. But let's just talk about that Bruckner rezoning that created such a stir, and then ultimately was approved. And then recently on Allerton Avenue, the borough president came out to support a rezoning plan. What do you think? Is there a bad process? Is this a good thing? Is this what the mayor said? We want to be the city of yes. What's your vision of that?
We have a housing crisis throughout the city of New York, right? My district alone, I've built over 8,000 units of 100% affordable housing. Not everyone that requires affordable housing, is looking for affordable housing, lives in the South Bronx. You have individuals that live in the North Bronx, East Bronx, West Bronx that are looking for housing. And therefore, everyone in the city of New York should do their fair share. When you look at the New York Housing Conference, they came out with a report of all 51 council districts and what they've done in the last 10 years in terms of building affordable housing. That council district was almost last in terms of building 14 units of affordable housing in the last 10 years. That is unacceptable.
We could do this forever. I do want to bring John back into the conversation. But you had the Southern Boulevard neighborhood plan.
So the Southern Boulevard neighborhood plan.
You currently have it going on. And I recall a conversation we had about what ultimately turned into the racial impact rezoning legislation.
Yes.
You're okay with this as long as whatever's being done gets filtered through that prism, through that legislation. In other words, to make sure it's done right, as opposed to the way things were suggested when we had the Jerome rezoning, when originally the Southern Boulevard rezoning was suggested, right? Am I taking the words out of your mouth?
No, there was no racial impact study, legislation, or bill at the moment, or law.
Yeah, it took a couple of years to pass
Yes.
it. I noticed that. So let's talk to you, Mr. Sanchez. Do you need to rezone? Is this going to be an issue with neighborhoods? Are people going to say, wait a minute, they're rezoning, therefore, I hate to use the word, but you hear it, undesirables, we're going to get people who don't belong in our community here. How do you see doing this so it's done right and done well?
Well, what's been refreshing is that there's been support from Manhattan community boards saying that we want more housing, that we have areas that are zoned for manufacturing where manufacturing isn't going to return. We'd like to see some housing there. So that's very encouraging. I think there's an appetite across the city for Manhattan to do its fair share, to ease the pressure in the outer boroughs, and to make sure that you're not limited in where you can live based on how much you make in a year.
So this really reflects what the councilman just said, that there are people in every New York City neighborhood who want affordable housing. So it's not like, really uploading people, or God forbid we should integrate our communities. That's a whole other story. But so this is just taking people from the neighborhood saying, you know what, now you can finally live decently.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a chance to live decently.
New Yorkers should have options. The New York that a lot of us grew up in, there were options. There was public housing, there was Mitchell-Lama, there was ample housing available. And we've relied too much on the infrastructure we built so long ago. It's time to create a new generation of housing of all types across the entire city.
And from what you're saying, it sounds like the people are get the idea. I think one of the things would just be realistic. If you have homeless people on the street, or people who even go to work. I saw this the other day at a friendly fridge in my community. I dropped a bunch of canned goods in the bin. Right away, there were people coming off the subway, people who have jobs, who came and didn't have enough food to feed their family. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you, a council member, about the Metro North stops. And through this dialogue, you have one coming to Hunts Point. They're coming to Hunts Point, Morris Park, Parchester, Van Nest, and Cobb City. What is that going to do, or is that going to energize the housing market in your neighborhood?
It would energize the housing market, and it would energize the economy. You know,
In general.
and so, you know, to be in Hunts Point, and to have an opportunity to hop on the Metro North and to get to Penn Station in 15 minutes. I mean, you're saving time. You know, New Yorkers' time is precious to us, and you know, and it gives you an opportunity where you can go and really look for other jobs, other high-paying jobs. Now, the Metro North. When we're talking about the Metro North, there is going to be 2 rezonings that are going to be attached. And these are conversations that we're having moving forward, where there's also going to be an opportunity for building affordable housing in these areas.
In your area, or
no, we're talking about the Parkchester and the Morris Park
so
area.
those will include some rezonings to do what?
to build commercial and to also build housing there as well.
And for you, it'll go through, I'll use the word prison, but the same legislation to make sure that it's done well. What did you learn from those processes? You know, I asked Borough President Gibson, now that she's Borough President, what did she learn from the Jerome rezoning? And she, I don't know if you'll answer the same way. She said, I never want to go through that again. But what she did, she and Councilmember Cabrera at the time, what they did was recraft a plan that was handed to them. What did you learn down in Southern Boulevard?
Well, you know, the decision that I made based on the Southern Boulevard rezoning was there was no racial impact study. See, my district is extremely low-income community, but we're transit rich, and we're transit rich. 90% of the land that the city at the time that de Blasio's administration wanted to rezone was privately owned. We had no idea what the developer were going to build there. And therefore, that the notion of, well, there being gentrification or other developers seeing, okay, well, they're going to build higher, more rents are going to be much higher, therefore they're going to increase the rents for those that are currently living there that are not living in rent stabilized. The fear was real. Now, with having...
And I have to say, if you drive on, let's say, the Major Deegan toward the Triborough Bridge and you look to your right, you can see what the effect of that before it was roped in. Do I have that right without criticizing too many people? But that is what happened, right?
Yeah. And so, you know, the decision that we made based on the Southern Boulevard rezoning that was proposed was, at the moment, there was no racial impact study. So we did not know what the outcome was going to be should we have approved that plan. Now there is a racial impact study, meaning moving forward, any rezoning that happens, there needs to be a racial impact study.
You and your colleagues, you see this working well? In other words, it goes through there and people take it seriously? Because, I mean, I've seen enough EIS studies that show stuff that's not true. So, you know, that means they didn't take any regulation seriously.
Well, the racial impact study is another tool that communities have and elected officials have when making decisions if they want to approve this project or not.
Right. Mr. Sanchez, let's just talk about where in the Bronx. You had talked about the hub. Are there buildings that are actually vacant, let's say business or commercial buildings that are vacant that you say, wow, we could build housing here?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that this is not going to be an immediate solution. There are some buildings where a few floors are vacant, and it's going to take time for the entire building to be vacant because you can't construct housing as well as have commercial tenants, and that would violate a lot of laws.
All I'm thinking about is just, okay, good, it's approved, let's just get it done. But that's just me.
But there are pockets of commercial space in the hub, but also downtown Flushing, Jamaica, Queens, even downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City. We just want the state to allow building owners to have that opportunity. Right now, they can't convert because of the year they were built.
And are there building owners, and I mean, just using what you just said, are there building owners then who are saying, you know what, if I had the opportunity to do this, I would, but they, of course, haven't come out because it's too difficult to even consider?
Definitely, 100%. Oh, definitely. Throughout the city.
Talk to me, if you look at their website for a 5-borough housing movement, there's a whole list of sponsors. I mean, perused it a little bit, who are those sponsors? Like, who's behind this, aside from the gentleman sitting next to you, that you think can have impact?
Well, it's a coalition across the 5 boroughs. We have partners such as the NAACP, supportive housing provider Breaking Ground, the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Urban Green Council. And the reason why the Urban Green Council is supportive is because converting office space is less carbon intensive than brand new construction. So it's really across sectors that want to see more housing being built and see office conversions as one tool in the toolbox.
Councilman, let's just use you for your seat in looking at the whole city as far as development. Is there anything out there that should be modeled or could be modeled in the Bronx? Like you say, well, I approved a project for one of your colleagues or helped move something through in Brooklyn or Queens that makes you say, gee, we could do that in the Bronx, that kind of thing. I mean, I'd love to tap into what you've seen after these years doing land use.
I mean, there are different models, and again, it all depends on the communities. But one model that I am extremely proud of, and it's one of my first rezonings that I approved, which is La Central, where we built a mixed use, mixed income. And it's a mixed-use project where there was a homeless set aside, and the AMIs went up to address and to help families, working families, making up to $120,000. We got a Y in there.
I was about to say YMCA,
we got
BronxNet Studios.
We have commercial space there.
Right.
We revitalized a vacant lot.
How enthusiastic is the commercial community to put businesses in that area, in those spaces?
Well,
or is it's still being worked?
No, it's mine.
That's a very crowded community. Let's be clear.
It is a very crowded community, but I know that the property owner wants to bring in the right business for that community. Mm-hmm. You don't want to bring in a business in which their residents in that immediate community cannot afford to purchase what they're offering.
That certainly makes sense. How do you keep the price down? I mean, Mr. Sanchez was talking about tax incentives. I mean, what do we do to encourage developers to do these things and keep it affordable, or does it always have to be governmental supported? In some form.
It all depends on what they're selling. It all depends, right, what their market is, Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, we want to build, but we want to build responsibly. Mm-hmm. We want to ensure that what we're building, we're keeping communities intact, and the businesses that we're bringing in, residents in that immediate community can afford what those businesses are offering.
Do you get a lot of pressure to move something through that you think this is a tough question, and I'm sorry. Do you get a lot of pressure to move things through that you say, you know what, this just doesn't comply with the standards that you have in your mind?
Well,
because I know years of discussions with you, those are high standards.
We rely heavily on the local elected official. The council members, right? They are elected by their immediate community. They know the needs of their community. And when we're making decisions collectively in the committee, we're taking the recommendations from the community board, the borough presidents, and of course that local member who represents that area.
Mr. Sanchez, let's just conclude. Have you just talk about? I mean, you go down. Anybody goes downtown, you see these big buildings, these big office buildings. You know nobody's in there. The security guard the doorman, a woman is standing in there, and there's nothing going on. How close are we to doing this, or the legislation is the first piece? Like, and how do we get there? I'm completely impatient. So just take that as an assumption.
Well, this is the exciting thing.
Oh.
In 5 weeks, we can change decades-old state laws that prohibit housing from being built across the city. We can finally legalize office conversions. We can have more apartments per floor in buildings, and we can change pre-civil rights era laws that were passed. So in the next 5 weeks, if people are interested, join 5 borough housing movement.
There you go. We
want to make sure that there's housing of all types for New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs.
And so my continual idea to, say, when is this going to be done? Is there a time frame, or getting that first big step is an important step?
Changing the state law is the huge big step. And then in year 2, working on the city.
What do you hear from legislators, or all the way up to, it's going to have to go through the governor, presumably?
Yeah, so it's in the governor's executive budget proposal, And what's great,
It's in there?
It's in there already.
Okay.
And what's great is that legislators across the 5 boroughs say, this is an idea that makes sense. We want to convert office space to residential. We want to have some affordability, and we need more housing built. So it's one of the few issues on housing that hasn't received a lot of pushback. So we feel
that's
good about
So
it.
you feel good about it. Councilman, let's ask you to conclude by just giving us your vision of what is like you're working on right now in this realm that you're excited about.
I mean, there are many projects. I was just visiting a colleague of mine in Brooklyn, where we're able to transform an empty lot
See, I want to hear this. This is good.
Into housing. It will go through MIH, but there also will be market rate housing that's conducive for that immediate community.
Your face lit up a little bit with that. This is fun. This is good work for you.
No, it is. I really enjoy taking my experiences in building development or building housing in the South Bronx and helping colleagues who don't often get that opportunity.
Who's that councilman?
Councilmember Yeager, Calvin Yeager.
Okay, great.
They're not all council members have land that is ready to be developed.
Right.
And so, for example, Jamani Williams, in his time as a council, I believe he only had one land use application that came through the council. So when he actually got one, he got really excited. When you are in a position where you can sit with your immediate community, you can take a vacant piece of land and you can build around it and build for the future, it's something that's extremely exciting.
Anybody who has commercial property, my friends in real estate, talk to if they're vacant and you're saying, what are we going to do here? Maybe talk to Mr. Sanchez or even let the council member know and we can move it forward. Councilman Rafael Salmanca Jr., thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And John Sanchez, good luck with the project. And
Thank you.
Let's hope we can create more and better and affordable housing for Bronxites and New Yorkers. Thank you guys, and thanks to our producer, Rebecca Hemmick. Director is Nick Marrero. Also the cast of thousands who are working with us here in the studio. Now, next week, we will talk about the vibrant Bronx LGBT community and the most recent efforts on HIV and AIDS. Another very important show that affects so many of us here in the Bronx. We will see you then. Good night.